Housing shortage continues in Florida tonight. We're going in depth on the struggle that so many Floridians continue to face after a loved one dies without a written will. Reporter Sophia Hernandez tonight taking a deep dive on this and the solutions just now coming to the surface.
I did not want to lose our home that we grew up in.
Natasha Abner has lived in the Richmond Heights community of Miami for over 50 years. She recently dealt with the heirs property issue after the passing of her grandfather. His home was left to her mother and disabled uncle.
Basically, what they had to do is actually quitclaim deed the property over to me in order for me to be able to save it. However, because there's a brother that was older than me who's deceased, we first had to make sure there were no children for him.
In Natasha's case, there weren't. But if there were, the house would have gone to them. It was a lengthy, confusing process she completed with the help of a lawyer. But in doing so, she noticed many of her neighbors were faced with the same thing.
So the vast majority of African American homes in this particular neighborhood, the majority of them have reverse mortgages. The majority of them, there are a lot of siblings, and they just don't have the knowledge of what can be done.
After her experience, Natasha went back to school to study real estate to learn just that. And it's not just her. There are nonprofits in Miami, like Legal Services of Greater Miami, that have about 40 cases that started within the last year due to this very issue.
And they run the gamut. So it can be anything from a person just saying, I have my home, I want to create a will so I can transfer my home. So there's that. But we also have cases where somebody's currently living in what is heirs property. And so those are the cases that are complicated.
And it's not just in Miami, but in Jacksonville. Lisk Jacksonville is a financial intermediary who works to keep wealth from seeping out of the underserved communities.
In Florida, we are particularly vulnerable as storms can hit a community at any time.
Unfortunately, when there's no end-of-life directive and you add in the sometimes complex relationships of families, it can be a challenge.
And, that is particularly a issue in vulnerable communities because now those properties become vagrant properties. And again, when you're talking about institutional investors are savvy enough so that they can in turn, pick off family members and buy their interest in the property.
It's a common practice throughout the state.
It's lack of knowledge, lack of, I'll say, financing. Credit is a big problem. So a lot of people are not aware, that credit is important, that in order to help them. So these developers come in, sometimes they'll say, okay, I'm going to help you with your credit and I'm going to help you do this. And before you know it, you've signed your home away.
At Lisk, they are averaging about 100 cases a year, but there are roughly 12,000 in their area.
We have committed to resolving at least 2,700 in some of our most vulnerable communities. And that has an economic impact in and of itself of well over $169 million. That means, we are looking at putting $169 million back into our local economy. And that's because we know once we help people resolve their heirs cases, issues, they now are property taxpayers. They take care of their property. So it has an economic consequence in our community.
Recently, the state has made strides in trying to adopt parts of national standards into Florida's heirs property law.
If one of the part owners wants to force a partition sale, they have to first offer their share to the other owners. So if that, like say, investment entity now wanted to force that, the other owners have to be given the opportunity to buy that person's share.
However, while it's a good protection, it may not save that family's home.
Problem is, in cases, in families that we see here, especially low-income families, those other family members may not have the money to buy that 1/3 share.
It's a fear that Abner has seen play out time and time again.
I feel like we're being shafted. I honestly, if I could say anything about it, we're just not given the fair chance to be here anymore.
It's why she and other local organizations are hoping that by going out into the community and teaching others of their rights and options, heirs property issues could be far and few. Sophia Hernandez, Florida 24 Network.